Good day, good evening. Welcome to the second segment of our Module 3 on services trade. As we have foreseen in the program, today's session will be interactive live questions and answers session. And we have with us our colleagues from the Trade in Services and Investment Division. So I'll give them the floor. They will explain how best to field the questions and provide you with answers. We've allotted 1 hour for this session, so I wish you all the best. And I now give the floor to our colleagues. Have a nice session.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. My colleagues, Magden, Antonia, and me, we are ready to answer your questions. As mentioned on Tuesday, that this session is for Q&A, but mainly is for you to raise your questions, share your views. At the end of my presentation and Antonia's presentation, we suggest a number of questions, but then this is just questions, sort of indicative questions. Please feel free to raise your own questions, not just the questions on my presentation, Antonia's presentation, but also the presentation delivered by Magden, the overall picture of trading services in the context of COVID pandemic. So I think it's just with this brief introduction, now I would like to open the floor. Before you raise your questions, maybe I should invite my colleagues Magden and Antonia to say a few words. Antonia, please.
Thank you, Rosie, and hello, everyone. We hope that you still have, a recollection of the main themes we discussed on Tuesday. The idea for today is really to leave the floor in a way to you to ask us any questions or to share any reflections based on what you heard us present on Tuesday. So I think you can both raise your hand or use the chat, or there's ways of getting in touch and asking us. We can also put up the slides with the questions that we had at the end of our presentations. But first we wanted to see maybe if you had any broader questions or issues you wanted to raise or comments that you just wanted to make. Thank you.
And please don't let us ask each other questions, so I think it'd be more interesting I guess we can go through the issues and points of discussions that Antonia and Rosie had listed. And then of course there can be others that we could focus on. You can also write your questions in the chat if that's easier for you that way.
Okay, if no one wants to raise questions, how about we start with the questions we put forward on maritime transport, on shipping, and then we move to the questions raised by Antonia on digital services. So first, you may recall that we discussed shipping disruptions. The impact on maritime transport on shipping probably is one of the significant impact, during the pandemic. And then, so it's not just the impact on the sector, but also on the global supply chains. So I put forward 3 questions, but basically it's for you to discuss. I cannot claim that I have answers to these questions. You may recall the first one is, what are the factors that led to the recent shipping disruptions, factors within the maritime transport sector and also outside maritime sector. And then second is what lessons could we draw from the impacts of recent shipping disruptions, in particular for maritime transport services? And the third is that is there any role for trade policy and the WTO to play to help developing countries mitigate negative impacts of shipping disruptions and resist future shocks? So would anyone wants to address one of these questions or all of them? Please, you can raise your hand or just, use the chat function as you wish.
Good morning. Can you hear me? This is Olivera Jocic from Serbia speaking.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Rosie, it's good to see you even through these virtual means. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question for you, but you rather quickly came to this part of but anyhow, it is very much related to your presentation. It is about the soaring shipping costs between Asia and America that were higher than those between Asia, meaning China, mainly Shanghai, to Europe. Can you please explain that? So what was the reason why these are between Asia, Shanghai, and Los Angeles were higher by more than 100% than, if I remember correctly, there was a slide showing that Shanghai, Rotterdam rose only for 1%. So what is the explanation for that?
Maybe I should go back to the slide. Let me. You are talking about you are comparing the shipping rates between Asia to North America and the shipping rates from Asia to Europe. That's your question?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think in order to answer your question, maybe I should explain a little bit about what are the factors affecting shipping rates. Probably that would probably help to answer your question. First of all, shipping rates. When we talk about shipping rates, first the components of shipping rates is not the basic freight, right? You mean the freight for the carriage from port to port, but it's also cover the costs arising from the transport, the hinterland transport, and also the port handling. And so first of all, it's the component of the shipping rates. When we talk about shipping rates, you have to look at the different components. That sometimes it's because the cost at the port and also the cost of the hinterland transport that have added to the overall shipping cost. So, for example, in the United States, in the two major seaport, Long Beach and Los Angeles, because of the shortage of port facilities and also outdated infrastructure, they have serious hinterland log jams, and also containers they couldn't be transported to warehouses to the destination, and then so the detention of containers also add the expense of shipping cost. So this is one to look at the component of shipping cost. Another important aspect to understand shipping rates is to look at the factors affect shipping rates. Normally, you have to look at the first important is to look at the distance. When you have longer distance, of course, shipping rates will be higher. Okay, and then port operation. I already mentioned that will affect the shipping rates. And also, we also look at, it's very important, is to look at the trade flow. The trade flow will also affect the shipping rates. So, for example, the other day during my presentation, I mentioned that, for example, from Europe and North America to East Asia, the shipping rates are much lower than the other way. Is because trade flow from Europe and North America to Asia are much, fewer than the other way. And then another important factor is competition. If you look at whether there's enough competition along that trade route, that will also affect the shipping rates. So there are many factors that will affect the shipping rates. And then to answer your question, why from North America, from East Asia to North America, is cheaper, appear cheaper than from East Asia to Europe. I think my understanding, the main reason I think is first distance, and also the routes. Because if you from East Asia to North America, you just across Pacific. But then from East Asia to Europe, that's more complicated. Because if you look at the route, the shortest route is go through Arctic, but then is not sort of feasible. It's not sort of very realistic. So you have to go through Indian Ocean, and then go through Suez Canal, and then Suez Canal also charge very high fees for the passage to cross Suez Canal. If you don't pass Suez Canal, then you have to go through South Africa. That's very long. So all these reasons, I think this is the main reason, is the distance, geographic reasons. Okay, I hope I answer your question.
You're muted, Oliveira, sorry.
Yeah, yes, fine. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Any question, please, if you have in your mind. Digitalization of trading services, please. I think you should be very interested.
Hello, good morning.
Please. Yeah.
To everyone from Argentina, very early morning here. I was looking at the slide on disruptions on shipping transport. And I wonder whether decarbonization is going to increase that disruptions. There is clear the intention, is particular from some developed members, to in fact accelerate the decarbonization of maritime transport. And of course, this is a big concern for developing countries. I wonder what your opinion on this is. I think it's not only a question of technology, but also a question of getting access to financing. Do you have any opinion, any reaction to share about this trend? I understand it's something to expect. I don't know if maybe the pace of this decarbonization is going to be an issue when talking about disruptions. Was my question clear, or I confused you?
Yeah, could you please rephrase a little bit your question? Your main question. Your question is about whether WTO can do something to address this disruption or to help this developing country?
No, maybe my first question has to do with potential impact of decarbonization in maritime transport.
Decarbonization, okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, well, this is decarbonization. Yes, first of all, yeah, because of the time constraints, I didn't explain. Yes, decarbonization is probably one of the important trends in the transport sector, in shipping as well. I mentioned in my presentation that the new vessels ordered by shipping lines, they are all, more environmental friendly with less carbon emissions. Yeah, but you are right that the impact on developing countries I think is something that worth attention, worth discussion, because on the one hand, that's definitely is a good thing if vessels, if they the new vessels, if they are more environmentally friendly with less carbon emission, that's definitely is good for to abet climate change. Yeah, that's good. But on the other hand, developing countries, first of all, the shipping market is already concentrated. The top shipping lines, they are mainly from developed countries, plus probably one or two emerging economies. And then with the new decarbonization requirement, small shipping lines from developing countries, they may have difficulty to meet the decarbonization requirement. And then so I think the competitive position, I think their competitive position will be weakened because of this decarbonization requirement. So this is something that I think developing countries, they do need more support in that context, in the decarbonization context. So this is something that I think really require more discussion, I think.
Perfect, Rosie. Thanks for your feedback. My second question, or maybe just an observation to share with you. You mentioned that global integrated change where or goods provided so through global integrated chains were the most affected because of the maritime transport disruptions. But in the first module, we saw that global value chains were at the end as affected as other production chains. So at the end, I wonder whether maritime transport has had any concrete or real impact in production itself, or it was the same for any kind of production chain. Do you need again to rephrase the observation?
You are referring to one of my I think slides about supply chain disruption, and
yes,
and then yeah, I mentioned that the goods manufactured through global supply chains are most exposed to shipping disruption.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then because 50% of global trade is intermediary goods, and then so shipping is always involved in the global supply chains. And then so when you have shipping disruptions, of course, supply chains will be disrupted. And then because the supply chain, all these slowdown operations along the in shipping, of course, that will also slow down the production process. So this is, and also that will increase the cost of the globalized production process. So this is what I meant to say in my presentation. Your question is that, do you want to some specific examples or what?
No. That's clear. That's what I heard from your presentation.
Yes.
I was just trying to match that information with the information we were provided in the first module. In the first module, it was mentioned that according to facts, global value chain intensive industries have not been more affected than other industries, in this case by the pandemic. So my observation was at the end, disruptions in shipping transport have been more problematic for global integrated productive change than any other industries in general. In the context of the pandemic, that's maybe my observation.
Oh, okay. Oh, that I don't know your first module
Okay.
by my colleagues, probably from the research division. Maybe I can invite Antonia or Martin. I don't know whether they have some comment.
Well, thank you very much for your question. To be honest, I wouldn't be able to have an explanation off the top of my head. I think instinctively what Rosie says makes a lot of sense, because the more you need, if you need to transport inputs several times and you're transporting them by sea, every time there is a disruption in terms of, delays and particularly higher rates to transport, that you would assume that those increased costs, add up along the production chain. But I'm not aware of what the findings from the Economic Research Division are. We looked at it, of course, from a services trade perspective. So in terms of trade in maritime services, maritime transport services, what Rosie has described is a situation where disruptions have been significant along particular routes. Now, and logically, you would expect that the more inputs there are in a production process, and the more these inputs are transported by sea, you would expect these to trickle down and have a higher impact than production processes that maybe rely only on the value addition at one point along the chain rather than at several points. But I don't have any more insights to offer on this. Thanks.
Thanks to you.
Can I have? I have a question. I think it is for Martin. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. It is actually related to the draft ministerial declaration, and you mentioned that there is certain dynamics now, even after since the ministerial conference was postponed. I'm coming from an exceeding government without any representation in Geneva, so we were not be able to closely participate or follow the work of the Council for Trade and Services. So can you just tell me what are the ministerial declaration itself? It's very, it doesn't say much. And if I understood correctly, it was very difficult to even agree on those several paragraphs. So what is going on currently, and what do you expect it might come up, whether it's going to be more ambitious or less ambitious than this one that we have right now? Thank you.
Less ambitious. To keep it. No, well, there are different things. I mean, there are two different ministerial declaration that members were working on at the end of last year. One was a general outcome document, a political declaration, covering a little bit of number of general topics, like was the case for past ministerial conferences. And so that was progressing relatively well, but this is essentially a very general and political declaration. But there are many ministerial conferences where we didn't have an agreed political declaration from ministers. So that was proceeding. But then what I showed you at the end of my presentation was part of another ministerial declaration that was focusing on the WTO response to the pandemic. And that originated from, before last summer break. Members wanted to, or many members felt that the WTO had to provide a response to the pandemic, or highlight what would be the trade policy response to the pandemic. And so the idea there was there has been a lot of discussions among members to develop a draft declaration that would focus on that. And it is, I think by WTO standards, it is relatively ambitious, even though it is only a political, it is political language, it's a political declaration, but it was meant to cover in some amount of detail the different, trade issues in the WTO that arose in view of the pandemic. So of course, and maybe the most difficult aspect, export restrictions. So some members, of course, wanted to further underscore the need to restrain that governments should restrain themselves from imposing export restrictions on vaccines or medical products in times of pandemics like that. You had a section on transparency and monitoring to further underscore the importance of transparency and of greater efforts to bring transparency in, again, situations that we lived through and we're still going through to some extent. Transparency is important to avoid a lot of the problems we faced. So there was a section on that. There was a section on services, which I showed. Collaboration with other international organizations, something on trade facilitation, regulatory coherence, and then there was also a work plan in terms of trying to guide future work on that. So there was a lot of discussion. It became a little bit more focused as we got closer to the ministerial at the end of the year. So you saw there was 3 paragraphs on trade and services. Services is most typically ignored, in these kinds of higher level discussions. So we had a bit more earlier on, but this is what we were left with in November. This was not text that was agreed. This was just the latest proposal by the facilitator that had been designated by the General Council Chair to help facilitate those discussions. So it still would have needed to be further discussed and adopted by members at the ministerial. Since the postponement, there has been some discussion, not only on that aspect, but on the other side of this, which is, of course, the TRIPS waiver in January, February, but at least for the discussion of this draft, it didn't really, it didn't really move forward. Let's put it that way. So, but it will come back, and clearly there was a lot of good number of members that wanted to move quickly on this because gladly the pandemic is receding, but if there is a WTO response, it'd be good to issue it before it's finished. So so there was a call to, and same thing for the waiver. So there was a call to try to move ahead quickly on this, and not having and not waiting for necessarily a more general ministerial conference, but trying to agree on that beforehand. The problem, of course, is that this is highly political, and so there are links between having this political declaration on the trade policy response and the waiver, the TRIPS waiver. So clearly some members would not think it would be appropriate to have a WTO response without having what they have most interest in, which is the TRIPS waiver. So that's one political aspect. And then there's also some resistance in having ministers meet to focus only on this and not on fisheries or other issues that are seen as important. And I think also the reality is that it's would be very difficult to, not impossible, but difficult to finalize this outcome without ministers being involved. So I think there's a lot of support generally for the gist of the latest draft, but there are some issues that are quite controversial. Of course, export restrictions being the main one, because you have some members that imposed export restrictions or the like, and others that were affected by that. I think the services part is of course, it's not agreed, and I'd be interested to see what people think, whether you think in light of what we discussed, the impact of the pandemic, the need for services to contribute to the recovery, whether you think it falls short or something else should be addressed in this or not. But I think there was good support, I think, even from the main actors for that particular text. Many want revisions going one way on the text on export restrictions, others want revisions to the text on export restrictions going the opposite way. But for services, I think, I think there was good support. So it'd be a shame if that text kind of falls apart, which is, of course, quite possible. So I hope I wasn't muted.
No. At least I heard you clear and
good.
Perfectly. Thank you, Martin.
Any other? Yeah, please.
Yes,
Francisco.
I wouldn't like to discourage other participants to ask questions also. On the contrary, going to e-commerce, since this is a course, I understand you have to keep a very neutral position, but I really appreciate if you could give us your opinion regarding the scope of the moratorium, meaning, does it include content, does it not? What we can draw from the history of the negotiation of the moratorium? Do you have any light to share on this issue?
I guess this is for me. No, I'm really grateful for any question, really. And I would encourage, and it's great, and I really appreciate that Francisco and Olivia are participating actively. And of course, the floor is open for everyone. Now, so you're asking a very important question, and I think to a large extent, my views are irrelevant in terms of what I think it covers or what it doesn't cover. But maybe I would just take it and not look necessarily at the negotiating history, because I think, to a large extent, this is not an agreement. The moratorium has always been agreed in a temporary manner. So it was always agreed only until the next ministerial conference. So whatever was agreed on the basis of some understanding. And then you could have, you know, the next agreement being based on the same or a different or explicit or not explicit understanding. I think maybe one couple of personal comments here is that there is a lot of discussion and a lot of fear or hesitation to renew the moratorium because some members are concerned about the implications in terms of revenue. So if you have a moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions, that means you will not be applying these customs duties, and therefore this creates, you know, a potential gap in customs revenue. And to me personally, that argument makes sense only if you consider that the moratorium applies also to content. Because if the moratorium were to apply exclusively to the transmission, at present, there is no customs revenue to be gained from applying customs duties to the transmission because it just doesn't happen at the moment. So all the estimates, and they're very divergent about the implications of the moratorium on customs duties in terms of customs revenue, have been done. And they're very different because they use different modeling and different approaches, but they've all been done by looking at what is the content on which duties will no longer be applicable. So to some extent, the two aspects of that discussion to me are linked. So one can worry about the fiscal implications or the revenue implications of the moratorium, but that worry is only justified, if you want, if you consider that the moratorium applies to content. If you consider that the moratorium only applies to the transmission part, to the bits and bytes that cross borders, there was no revenue on those, and there is no revenue loss. So I think that discussion, you know, has a certain internal logic, if you want, and that's very much my own personal view on this. So unless you cover content, then you can discuss about what the implications are. And then again, there, I think I would open another sort of observation or make another observation is that, you know, the implications of the moratorium or of any trade liberalization, tariff liberalization, because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. If you have a moratorium on the application of customs duties to content transmitted electronically, it means we're applying a zero tariff on that content, which in many instances used to be, which actually in all instances used to be a physical good, and now it's transmitted electronically, and it may be still a good for some members, for other members it is a service, but you're no longer applying a customs duty on those products. And it's, in a way, I think it's curious to me that that discussion has been framed in terms of the implications on revenue exclusively. Because I think when you discuss trade liberalization in general, the focus tends to be, yes, of course, on, you know, the loss in terms of customs revenue, but a broader consideration of the wider effects of liberalizing trade in those particular products. So it's been a focus that's so far been mainly on the customs revenue side of things, whereas maybe the discussion would be beneficial if you were broader and looking at what are the broader economic implications of suddenly deciding to apply duties on electronic transmissions, which at the moment members have, you know, committed or made an undertaking not to do. But this is an issue that will come up fairly shortly, because with the ministerial set for the week of the 13th of June, that's one issue on the table, which is the renewal, a decision on whether to renew the moratorium and also to extend and to continue with the work program. So the two issues are sort of discussed together, because many members think that the two should be in tandem, but although other members are of the view that the WTO should continue with its discussions under the work program, but not extend necessarily the moratorium on customs duties. But it's true that the two issues are discussed as a package. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. It's very much my personal reflection, but I think it's it's an aspect that always struck me as maybe these to me are two sides of the same coin to a large extent. Thanks.
Back to you, Antonia. I see that Olivera is maybe writing down her next question. From my side, and maybe you go straight to my second doubt on the moratorium regarding revenues. We have seen that UNCTAD has prepared a report. It has been quite questioned by some members, and at the same time, there has been some private sector studies. We order support from some members. Has the WTO had any independent study on the revenues or potential revenues impact? Again, even your personal opinion is well appreciated.
Yes, I mean, there's a report or a study that was done by our colleagues in the Economic Research Division. I believe it was 2017 or 16, but I can dig that out for you and then send it along. So it looks at the customs revenue loss arising from the moratorium. But it has been, I don't know if if all members would call that neutral, because some members and some other international organizations have contested the findings on the basis of the fact that they were viewing the scope of products that they took into account to calculate these customs revenue implications as too narrow. They should have, in the opinion of some, they should have included more products. So what the study did was to look at a range of products that we traditionally associate with the impact of digitalization. So these are essentially goods, used to be goods that were traded in physical form, but that now have been digitized and are traded cross-border through electronic transmissions. So we're talking essentially about books, about movies, about magazines, audiovisual products to a large extent. In my days, you used to watch a movie by renting or buying a video cassette, not even a DVD, and now you would be streaming it. So clearly, those video cassettes or DVDs were previously imported in a physical format, and you had, depending on the customs regime in force, you paid, customers, there were duties imposed on those products. Now they're streamed, and therefore, most of these customs revenue has been lost. So I think it is, if you look at that range of products, it is undoubted that there's been a loss of customs revenue. At the same time, if I remember correctly, what the report did, it also looked at how, trade had increased in these products. So, you had no customs duties. It was much easier to trade. It was much more immediate to receive these products through online streaming. And so there was a significant increase on online trade. But at the same time, we clearly also see a fall in trade in these products when traded in physical form. I guess some still are, but essentially that's a dying, trade to a large extent. I have myself personally never not bought a physical DVD. I still buy books, but apart from that, I haven't bought one in ages. So there's clearly an impact. Clearly, in terms of how trade has changed, trade has gone online. It's undoubted. And of course, the fact that you don't have duties, the moratorium may or may not play a role in that respect. It's not clear because, the moratorium is a gentleman's agreement. If a member were to impose a duty, nobody would be able to take them to dispute settlement, but nobody has decided to do so far. The moratorium may have been, of course, an incentive and, an important check on that maybe intention to add duties. So I think it's clear there's been an impact in terms of customs revenue, but I think it's important to take a broader picture and look at also how trade has increased and how consumers ultimately have benefited from having access to these products, in greater quantity, quality, lower prices, and just wider choice. So I think it's a discussion in that sense. So there's been, just to come back maybe to your original question, there's been a lot of work done on looking at the impact of the moratorium. I think personally, and this is a very personal view, there's quite a bit of confusion also about what the moratorium is, what it isn't, what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to. Sometimes this is, a reflective of negotiating positions. So, if you are opposed, if delegations opposed to the idea of the renewing the moratorium, they would look for studies that show you a huge impact. Of course, that means a lot of content is covered. Otherwise, it wouldn't be such a huge impact. If you're instead, wanting to argue for the extension of the moratorium, then you would pick the studies that tell you the welfare benefits of the moratorium are enormous, which sometimes, maybe take into account elements that actually are not, strictly speaking, affected by the moratorium. So I think there's a little bit of confusion, and I think in a way, I wonder to what extent this confusion is also a bit deliberate on the side of both those who are for and against the moratorium. Very personal views. Thank you. Anybody else would like to step in on this or any other issue? Maybe, any reflections. It doesn't have to be a question. I think we'll also be very interested to hear from you, from your side, how, COVID has impacted services trade in your economies. What lessons have been learned, and, maybe picking up from what Martin was saying also, in terms of, the possible WTO role in response to the pandemic, what has been some of the reflection in terms of how you've seen services trade be affected by COVID-19, and whether you think the WTO has a role to play, and what role might that be? We'd really be interested in hearing also comments from your side that don't necessarily have to be questions addressed to us. I think it must be either very early or very late for most of you.
Okay, the other usual suspect, if I may. I don't know if I see that there are some colleagues also online, so I don't want to occupy all the time of the presenters, and also, so maybe if someone else wants to share something, then I'll just refrain from. Let's wait for a few seconds if someone else wants to take the floor. If not, then I just wanted to share a bit of experience from the last couple of years since the pandemic actually changed our lives completely. It's the before the pandemic starts, the government of Serbia invested heavily in infrastructure in terms of telecommunications. So it was the broadband, the internet, and everything else. So when when we faced the pandemics, the first thing that changed was the education. So it went completely online. And that was working. I'm not saying perfectly, but it was good. It was well organized. So basically, only in the beginning, maybe a couple of days or something like that were lost. Other than that, you know, the pupils and also the students were attending the online. How to say that? So they were basically in school. Still, we have this mixed, how to say, like the mixed system. So the small pupils, they go to school in person, and they work with their teachers, and the rest, depending on the situation, in health situation, epidemic situation, they do that either remotely or combine online and so on and so forth. But when it comes to e-commerce, it exploded in 2020, and also the same trend was in 2021. And another aspect of economy that is very much important for us is the ICT, the huge export of almost $1 billion or the euros. So we count it in euros. In 2021, it was 100 million euros in 2020. So it actually, it is very important. It's a huge, it has a huge portion in the GDP as well. So it's mainly like business services, and also those who are providing through mode 4, but also mode 3. So that was actually good, and that was working perfectly. And when it comes to e-commerce, it was also good because we went through some serious lockdowns. When they actually the population was literally locked for a couple of days or 3 days without, you know, being able to go out, leaving their homes, except for, you know, certain categories of, and these were the, you know, those who were providing, of course, the food were exempted, and they were bringing us food and whatever we needed. Either from the restaurants or from the shops. So we have, given the circumstances, we survived, and it was a good lesson that we learned. I don't know if we can share it with the WTO members, because we observer, but I also just wanted to use this opportunity to share with you and with the colleagues some of our positive experience in those horrible times. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really, if you want, it's great to hear also the glass half full sometimes. You know, we had a very hard time, I think, across the world, and it's clear that, you know, the ability to do a lot of things online, including, you know, essential things like education or just, you know, distribution services for food and things like that, you know, allowed many of us to continue functioning, and many economies to continue functioning. So I think that's, it's probably an experience that has been felt across the world. Of course, you know, the discussion, I think, in the context of the WTO has, you know, members have reflected on this experience in these last couple of years. And some are saying that we should essentially go further in trying to facilitate trade that takes place through digital means. Most notably, the participants in the Joint Statement Initiative, who are thinking that, you know, we're thinking that also before the pandemic, of course, but their view has been reinforced by what happened and what we've all lived, and what, you know, you were just telling us, Olivia. And that we should take a look at the WTO rules that exist when it comes to digital trade, because, I mean, I think you know, everybody's in agreement that the existing agreements already apply to services, specifically in our case, that are traded online. But members should expand and upgrade and update these rules. And there are other members that instead are of the view that that's premature, that you know, we have a system of rules that is in place, but that the opportunities are undoubtedly there from, you know, being able to trade services online are not necessarily available to every member in the same way, because the infrastructural gaps, the digital gap is real and significant, and therefore, you know, maybe they should be a focus on this aspect first, then before we start, you know, further, you know, promoting rules that would potentially exacerbate this different participation in digital trade. And, you know, that's what some of the discussion when it comes to the work program discussions are about, where, you know, some members are arguing that we should focus and look specifically under the work program on the experience that particularly developing countries and least developed countries have when they're trying to trade services online, and the challenges they face and what could be done to address some of these challenges, whilst others are of the view that they recognize, of course, that there are disparities and that these are significant, but that's maybe a reason for the WTO to actually, you know, play a part in further facilitating this trade, and also potentially, you know, at looking at how trade rules can contribute to also addressing that digital gap, particularly, for example, with increased liberalization and commitments when it comes to infrastructural services like the one we're discussing on Tuesday, notably telecommunication services. So at least that's sort of the overall, let's say, range of issues that are brought under the discussion of that item. Thank you. There's a last minute chance for one final question or a couple, if, you know, something pressing maybe that just occurred would be great.
Maybe I'm going to be repetitive, but just let me thank you once again. I imagine all the effort you make on preparing the presentation, arranging the slot, and maybe expecting a little bit more participation from our side. So let me thank you in the name of all of us.
That's very kind of you, especially considering how early it is for you. And but I mean, there's, you know, I think we wanted to give you an overview of what has happened to the services trade world in the last couple of years, and hope that that would spark questions. But, you know, if that's not been the case, we're very grateful to the questions that have hopefully been relevant also for other participants. So thank you also from us.
Great. We are indeed reaching the 1 hour mark. Now I see someone had sent us a question or a comment in the chat, which I will read perhaps, or if our trainers are reading it, if you wish to respond right away without wasting time, and then I think we will need to close this session.
I think it's a very valid comment and a useful comment, talking also, of course, about the role that digital trade can play the digital trade and digital services trade in particular can play in terms of inclusiveness, you know, by including more MIS and hopefully also more women and increasing their participation of services trade. And I think it's nice to finish on a high note where, you know, there's a sense that the WTO still has a role to play in facilitating this. So just thank you for the comment.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to participants for your engagement, to our three trainers, Rosie, Antonia, Martin, for being with us on Tuesday and today. And we have another Q&A session this afternoon at 3 o'clock for people from other different time zones. But if you are interested, you can, of course, join us as well in the afternoon at 3 p.m. Geneva time. So the recordings from these sessions today will be turned into a video, and we will be sending you, hopefully before tomorrow morning, links to those sessions. So if you are curious of what happened in the afternoon, you will also be able to see it. And we will also perhaps post in the Google Drive a study that Antonia referred to, if you are able to find it. So look into the folder for that particular study if we can attach it there. And just to let you know that we also included in the Google Drive a program for tomorrow's roundtable. In fact, the short biographies of the three speakers that will be speaking to you tomorrow. And the roundtable is meant to provide an opportunity for the senior WTO experts and services negotiators to share their insights on how the WTO could address important services trade policy issues. So you will hear them, and you will also be able to engage in Q&As with them. I invite you tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. or 13:30, and we've allotted an hour and a half for that session. So thank you very much for today, and see you tomorrow, hopefully. Or if you wish to join us this afternoon, you're welcome to do so. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.